why digital accessibility is truly vital in today's world. I'm Chris Rosa, and I'm proud to be President and CEO of the Viscardi Center, which is a network of nonprofit organizations that serve individuals with disabilities and their families. And we pride ourselves on empowering those individuals by meeting them where they are in the arc of their need for access, equity, and inclusion. And nowhere is our work more important than in the space of digital access and digital accessibility. Um, the digital revolution has changed all of our lives. So much of the way we live our lives are framed by digital resources and digital infrastructures and digital access. And that's particularly important for individuals with disabilities. Our ability to design digital spaces in a way that are accessible and inclusive have really transformed access and opportunity for Americans with disabilities and people with disabilities globally. Digital resources like websites and digital documents as a way of doing our work and a way of driving our commerce have given people with disabilities unprecedented freedom, liberty, and access in ways that the disability community has never experienced before. On the other hand, because of the peril that is posed by the way that those digital resources are designed, if not designed in ways that are accessible for people with disabilities, it poses an unprecedented risk of excluding people with disabilities than never before. And so there is, on the one hand, the dilemma and the remarkable opportunity that's posed to all of us who are invested in including people with disabilities in our businesses and in all aspects of American life. And at the Viscardi Center, we're really proud of being on the leading edge of designing digital spaces that are truly inclusive and accessible. And that's particularly important given our mandate to include individuals with disabilities in all aspects of community life. But also we understand that for business, it poses a really remarkable business opportunity. Americans with disabilities alone command more than $1 trillion of purchasing power. And for businesses that are always looking for new and untapped markets, there's a homegrown market that has been tremendously underleveraged. And so by a true commitment to meaningful, inclusive digital design, businesses have an unprecedented opportunity to tap into that burgeoning market of people with disabilities. And here to talk to us a little bit about the opportunity that digital accessibility services poses is a real national leader in that space, Mike Caprera, who is the lead on our digital accessibility services social enterprise at the Viscardi Center. And I'm now going to yield to Mike to tell us about why digital accessibility is particularly vital in today's world. Mike, welcome, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Chris, for that great intro. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Caprera. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's presentation, Why Digital Accessibility is Vital into Today's World. Okay, so I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Information Officer here at the Viscardi Center, and we're so pleased that you could join us today for this important topic. I'd like to start by noting that immediately following today's session, you will be asked to complete a survey about your experience. The Viscardi Center encourages you to please do so in order to help us continue to provide valuable trainings moving forward. Now, most of you are joining us through the WebEx platform and are hearing the audio by voice over IP through your computers. For technical support during the training session, please post your issue within the chat window. For issues loading WebEx or downloading the add-ins, contact WebEx at 1-866-229-3239. Please note that we'll be accepting questions from the audience during today's discussion, and you can submit your questions by typing them into the Q&A window located at the bottom right of your screen. We are also live captioning this session, which you can follow along within the captioning window at the bottom right of the screen below the Q&A window. You must open the window titled Multimedia Viewer to display the captioning. Now, before we get started, we would like you to answer one quick question that is being asked to provide a sort of baseline of participants' knowledge and comfort level with our topic today. Please note that your responses are anonymous, and answering the question honestly is essential to helping us understand your needs and effectiveness. So please take a moment to answer it. The question should be appearing on the right-hand side of your screen. And the question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 equaling very little understanding and 5 equaling extensive understanding, how would you rate your understanding of digital accessibility services and why it is important? Please take time to answer the question now. Okay, as we wait for WebEx to tally the answers. Okay, so it looks like we have some 2, 3, 4s and some even 5. So hopefully we're able to move everybody up into more of the 4 and 5 category today after today's session. So thank you very much. So now let's get started. So what is digital accessibility? Digital accessibility refers to the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites, digital tools, and technologies by people with disabilities. What you're going to hear today from me is the word access, providing access to websites, providing access to online digital resources. You're going to hear that word come up a lot today because in the end, that is what we're doing. We're providing access. What we like to say is when you think about digital inclusion or digital access or accessibility is equivalent to providing ramps or automatic doors or curb cuts to your brick and mortar buildings for your organization and businesses. And what is truly what your front door in today's world is your website. So if you do not have those quote unquote virtual automatic doors or virtual ramps into your organization, then you're leaving people with disabilities out from participating with your resources and your content. We like to say leveling the playing field for students with disabilities or even adult participating in types of higher ed type learning, providing those assistive technologies, assistive access, or using assistive technologies to access online content. Puts our students with disabilities on a level playing field with public school students. We like to say empowering people with disabilities by creating independence and retaining fulfilling employment and performing at a high level. And ultimately providing a culture of inclusion at your organization and business. So with that being said, there are 3 main topics to ensure that your organization and your online digital presence is fully inclusive. It is the website accessibility, document accessibility, and accessibility in video and audio content. And we're going to touch base on all 3 of these. But in the end, in order to have a fully compliant and fully inclusive online digital presence, you need to have all 3. So the first one we'll start with is website accessibility. So what is website accessibility really? It's according to the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. And more specifically, people can perceive and understand, navigate, interact with the web, and contribute to the web. Nothing is more evident than in employment. When people with disabilities are looking for jobs and your business's website is not accessible by people with disabilities, then they're not going to apply for any jobs there or even feel comfortable that that would be a safe or accommodating type work environment if they were to be hired at such company. So we like to step through that process. So is your website in compliance? Then 2, is your applicant tracking system in compliance or is accommodating to people with disabilities? Are you offering, video captioning for video interviews? Is that part of the process? And ultimately, is your corporate intranet, employee handbooks accessible for people with disabilities as well? So we're going to touch more about the video and the employee handbooks later, but it all starts at your website presence. Purchasing goods and services. I think the statistic, which we'll get to in another slide, is $1.2 trillion in discretionary income is available with people with disabilities. Could you imagine leaving that out of your business model and business case? And quite honestly, it's about purchasing goods and services online. And what we have seen is that people with disabilities are a very loyal group. And if they find a website that is easy to use and easy to purchase goods and services, they're going to come back to you time and time again and spend their hard-earned dollars. We're talking about access to research and information, being able to access information, whether it's about elections or political legislation, or even during the pandemic, we saw access to COVID testing or COVID vaccine and type information, which quite frankly was inaccessible for people with disabilities. If someone who was low vision could not access a website to look for their local pharmacy that would offer COVID testing or COVID vaccine options or booster options, they had nowhere to go, and they were essentially left out. So that is what we like to strive here and educate organization and businesses on, is always thinking about not only just to meet some sort of compliancy level, but also to ensure that the website is actually usable and can be accessed by different methodologies of assistive technology. So web accessibility encompasses all disabilities that affect access to the web. And here are some disabilities that are the primary focus when we're talking about web accessibility, which is auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual. There are a lot of tools out there that now actually develop specific profiles based on the different types of disabilities. And we'll go over those in a minute as well. But these are the primary focus. Now, a lot of these are coming in overlay type tool sets, which then can turn these profiles on. But again, when we're at the source code level, what we're doing is that we're focusing primarily on these 6 that can also have their assistive technologies be a useful tool to them as well. So what is the impact? I guess as you can see here, it's pretty large. 1 in 5 people are estimated to live with a disability, about 1.5 billion people. And like I mentioned earlier, with a combined disposable income of more than $1.2 trillion, could you imagine ever possibly leaving out that many people in your business case and in your marketing strategies? This is the largest minority group in the US, which also includes aging and elderly and someone that is temporarily injured. And also what I like to point out here is that, this is a minority group that you can enter in at any time. You might not necessarily be born with a disability. You could have a tragic accident and then you become disabled. You may lose your vision or your motor ability. So this is something to always keep in mind, that it's not just about people who are born with it, but you could also become disabled throughout your life as well. And that is why it is the largest minority group. The internet is currently built with an abundance of ableism. There is little to no attention paid to accessibility outside of regulated industries or after a lawsuit, which is true. Unfortunately, as what we have seen at the Viscardi Center, there is no real true enforcement of ensuring that public entities and businesses and organizations are required to make their website accessible, but they are liable to a lawsuit if they do not. There are guidelines in there, which we're going to get to in a little bit, called the WCAG standard, or the Section 508 standard, which provides just guidance and reference tools, in particular to Title II and Title III type organizations. Title II is more public entities, government entities, state agencies, etc., where Title III are all businesses that are open to the public, such as restaurants, hotels, hospitality, etc. But we get calls on a daily basis saying that we've been hit with a lawsuit what do we do next? We don't understand what this is. But as of right now, that is really the only real enforcement when it comes to website accessibility. So we hear this all the time as well, but I thought it didn't apply to me. Well, there was a major case a few years ago with Domino's Pizza, where Domino's Pizza's website and mobile application, which is, like I said, is considered a public accommodation, and they fall into the Title III category, and their ways of ordering pizza or other types of food was not accessible to people with disabilities, and they were sued. And the plaintiffs won a hefty lawsuit and settlement. But again, they felt that, Domino's did not feel that it applied to them. We've seen other cases recently. ADP was another that was recently hit with lawsuit where their mobile application was not accessible for employees of companies that use their service. That has recently changed, but again, they were forced to make that change because they were hit with a lawsuit. In 2020, website, application, document PDF, and video accessibility lawsuits were up almost 25% year over year, with an average of 10 per day. That's a staggering number. In 2021, the Americans with Disabilities Act-based lawsuits reached a rate of over 10 per day, with over 4,000 in total, and was a 15% increase from the prior year. In 2022, which the numbers had just recently come out, it was an additional 15% increase from 2021. So we're starting to see more and more of these lawsuits come every year. 74% of Americans with Disabilities Act-based lawsuits on website accessibility were filed against e-commerce sites, meaning that we're seeing that people with disabilities, like I mentioned earlier, are trying to purchase goods and services. They want to spend their money on what you have to offer, but they're getting very frustrated and they cannot make those services. And then ultimately that frustration leads to a lawsuit. So there is good news, I have to say. There's a huge upside to accessibility in large untapped market that can be reached when the ability is considered. Like I said, 1 in 4 adults in America have a disability, and they have that spending power. Just keep that number in your head, $1.2 trillion. Enhancing the website for most companies is more cost efficient and more time than changing physical attributes to your store. Think about that. How much it costs to redesign your brick and mortar stores, enhancing the accessibility features, like I mentioned, automatic doors, building ramps. Think about the cost that was to put those in. And then when you're talking about the same concept for your digital presence and your website, it's a fraction of that cost. And you're providing the same insight and same opportunity and same access to your organization and your business as you would online, as you would physically in person. As we become more educated as a society, coding for accessibility will be more normal practice. Yes, that's very true. And unfortunately, what we're still seeing coming out of the university and higher ed level is that new web developers and programmers and graphic designers are not being educated on accessibility standards or knowing how to code or develop with accessibility type practices. And they're having to learn that on the job, or they're not able to actually meet those standards, and they have to actually reach out to third parties that are able to do that. Here at the Viscardi Center, recently we have started an internship program where we can work with college level students, and we will train them on the accessibility standards, why it's important, how to test and provide accessibility website audits and usability type testing using assistive technologies, because we do see that there is a gap coming out of that university level. Back in March of last year, the Department of Justice had published guidance on how state and local governments, Title II, and businesses that are open to the public, Title III, can make sure that their websites are accessible to people with disabilities. Like I mentioned earlier, Title II, Title III, government entities open to the public. The Department of Justice put out this statement last year to reinforce this. This wasn't anything new that came out in last March. This is the WCAG standard and the other and 508 standards have been around for quite some time. But the Department of Justice felt it was necessary to reinforce this and put it out there again to ensure that these types of entities are indeed accessible to everyone. So what is WCAG? And that WCAG is the standard that we live by. So that stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It is the standard on how to develop for web content for accessibility. There are different methodologies in how this is done. We test to apply audits and usability type testing. That is done with automated tools. Now, the automated tool sets get us to about 65 to 75% of the way and meets that WCAG standard. But the manual piece is what gets us to that 100%, and what we like to call the final mile, to 100% of the WCAG standard. Here at Viscardi, we like to say that that we are testing with accessibility in mind and actually being tested by people with disabilities or native users of assistive technologies, so that you're getting that real usability, UX type experience from a native user. Then there's the remediation and fixing. So the first part was just a test, but then you have to know what you need to fix. So then we work with web development teams, programmers. We provide this comprehensive audit back to them, showing them exactly where their accessibility gaps are. And we will work side by side so that they can fill those gaps and ensure that not only the compliancy standards being met, but it's also usable as well. Now, there are different methodologies of this as well in terms of achieving compliance. There is a source code level, and there's also overlay tools that use artificial intelligence now, which are more cost effective. Source code methodology, like I mentioned earlier, is we work side by side with web development teams to ensure that, and to provide guidance to ensure that those gaps are being met at the source code level, and to ensure that when they are updating their websites, that those accessibility is kept in mind. Now, the overlay artificial intelligence types areas, or like I said, are more cost efficient way of achieving compliance. Some of the latest versions use artificial intelligence, which automatically scans your website in the first 48 hours of implementation, looking to fulfill those accessibility gaps. And then after that, scans your website every 24 hours, looking for any content changes and to, again, apply those or fill those gaps. The only thing with the overlay, though, is that it does not take in consideration documents and video content, or PDFs or embedded video, which we're going to get to in a second. But it's good to point out that there are options out there that are cost effective, but also require minimal effort by web development teams and are good for small to mid-sized operations. So the next bullet on here of the trifecta is the document accessibility. This is where we're going to talk more about online content such as PDF forms, white papers, applications that are in PDF format that reside on your website, etc. So the topics here, though, for under this section are: what is document accessibility? How is it accomplished, and why is it important? Now, what I will say here is that there is some overlap when it comes to remediating document content and websites. So there will be some similarities here, but they do live by the same standard of the 508 and also the WCAG. So what type of documents should be accessible? Well, what Viscardi will say is that everything should be made accessible, and when you're creating PDF documents and marketing materials, it should be accessible by all. We like to say that we don't like to create alternative type documents such as OCR of documents, because there was a lot of effort put behind branding guidelines and and imagery of your marketing concept. So we like to say is that we want to ensure that there is one document that can be accessible by all. And that includes employee handbooks, job applications, uh, legacy documents, training materials, student worksheets, bank loans. Um, but again, is that one rule of thumb is like we have to say is that any document that might be used by the public, your customers, employees, or other stakeholders should be made accessible. So what is document accessibility? Well, it's kind of a software coding and editing type process by someone who specializes in accessibility authoring techniques. We want to ensure that digital content is accessible by all, again, of your internal and external viewers, including those with low vision and blindness who utilize assistive technologies such as screen reader applications. One very popular screen reader application is JAWS. It actually is spelled out like the movie Jaws. But there's also NVDA is a free one that's out there. But essentially what we do is that we provide a tagging structure to a document. We provide, so it's almost like coding or web development, but it's behind the scenes. So anyone that does not require any sort of assistive technology doesn't even notice that this tagging structure is living within that document. But we go and we mark headings and we ensure that all imagery within those documents has appropriate alternative text descriptions. What alternative text descriptions are is that if there's an infograph or an image within the document, we write a very detailed description actually describing what's there. Because if someone who relies on a screen reader and they are trying to access your document, it'll just say error blank image or error blank page, where if we provide a descriptive alternative text, it will read that description word for word verbatim. So it gives them insight into actually what is being displayed within that document. We ensure that all forms are generated with fillable fields and provide what they call tooltips, and to ensure that when someone who is low vision that reaches that field, that they can appropriately enter that information into that fillable form. So how is it accomplished? So pretty much how do we do it? What's the secret sauce? So documents are usually created using traditional authoring tools like Microsoft Word, Google Docs, Adobe Acrobat Pro, etc. In some cases where there's no electronic version of a previously created document exists, the document needs to be scanned into a digital file format. These digital files contain something called metadata or tags. These tags identify the elements that we spoke about earlier, which include headings, paragraph structure, charts, lists, and tables. Using proprietary software, the Viscardi Center can assess the file and modify these tags to adhere to compliancy rules, which again, like with the website testing, gets us to about 75–90% of the way. And then we have remediation specialists here at the Viscardi Center, which again gets us to that final mile piece of 100% of accessibility, and also run through 6 points of quality assurance testing, which is done by people with disabilities as well. During that process, we then review the documents for any photos, images, graphics, and then manually insert that descriptive text, like I mentioned earlier, for each of the images so that the screen reader knows what to read to the viewer in a particular image. The best example, what I could say here is that for a document that would have to be scanned from a copy machine. So technically what that really is just an image on a page. And so someone who's low vision that relies on a screen reader application, it will come back to them and say error blank page because there's no tagging structure. It's just an image with no alt text description. So then what we do is that we take that same document and we go through it and we, through our automated tools and obviously the manual intervention, we're able to provide an appropriate tagging structure so that the document can be read word for word verbatim. And then during that final step of quality assurance is to check the remediated file for compliance. Again, we ensure that all taggings are marked, we get to 100% accessibility, but we also want to ensure that it is compliant as well. We do this by using accessibility checker features that are built into Microsoft Word or in Adobe Acrobat. And there's also other checkers that are out there called the PAC checker, which stands for the PDF accessibility checker. And these will give a really detailed report on where your document stands in terms of accessibility. But once we go through our methodology and we ensure to pass all of these checkers, then we deliver them back to the client. So why is this so important? Again, here's some overlap with the website accessibility as well. First, organizations that do not make documents, websites, and videos accessible face exposure to legal risk. Again, we touched upon that earlier. Second, there is an established business case for accessibility. Those organizations that have prioritized addressing may reap the benefits. We mentioned earlier that, again, that $1.2 trillion. Again, I'll keep saying it over and over again because that's a number that really should stick into your mind. And lastly, and what we feel is most importantly, is that organizations that proactively make their digital content and environments accessible promote social and economic inclusion. And we feel that they are rewarded through increased credibility through their social responsibility efforts. Again, not to harp on the legal aspect here, as we've already touched upon this a number of times, but listed here are the two guided legislations affecting digital accessibility, the ADA and Section 508 and the WCAG, which is the industry standard that courts are pointing to when adjudicating cases of this. Again, there are a number of national and international laws that enforce digital accessibility, but the two most associated with the flood of recent lawsuits are the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. When drafted, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 mandated that all electronic and information technology used by the federal government can be accessible to people with disabilities. Section 508 was intended to cover federal agencies, but has now been widely used, accepted by colleges and universities, as they are all falling under the subject of the requirements of Title II because they receive federal funding. So keep that in mind as well. So if you are a federal contractor or even state contractors at this point, they're all following the Section 508 and the WCAG standard to even be considered for any sort of grant or RFP type opportunities. The U.S. Access Board recently released an update to 508, which went into effect in 2018. So these changes are these guidelines and these recommendations are constantly changing. The WCAG standard is at 2.2 and is actually going to 3.0 soon. So again, there's constantly making changes and amendments to these types of guidelines. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, is the law most widely associated with digital accessibility for private sector companies as well. And that's where they fall under the Title III, like I mentioned earlier, which guarantees non-discrimination for people with disabilities in public accommodations, where the basis of over 2,000 digital accessibility lawsuits, more than ever before, were filed, with major historical settlements and decisions piling up against organizations such, like I mentioned, Domino's, ADP, but Target, Bank of America, Winn-Dixie supermarkets. It's becoming imperative for all organizations to really infuse a culture of accessibility and inclusion. So again, here's the business case. Again, can't drive this any farther. If the legal risk doesn't convince organizations to address the digital accessibility, so hopefully a strong business case will. Over 57 million Americans have some form of disability, and that number is growing rapidly as boomers age into retirement and age-related disabilities. In the marketplace, accessible digital files ensure current and prospective customers have access to all products and service materials. Various surveys have shown that the low vision population is growing, with over 21 million adults with non-correctable vision loss. From a marketing and revenue perspective alone, that number is quite formidable. Just think how nice it would be to suddenly have access to 21 million potential customers than you do today. Again, $1.2 trillion. And then lastly, the tangible social return on investment for accessibility and organizations that promote it as a rewarded in kind. Accessible digital materials in the workplace boost employee productivity for those with and without disclosed disabilities and plays a role in the hiring, retention, and advancement of individuals with disabilities. In a school setting, for instance, it allows children with visual and physical disabilities to fully engage in the classroom and work more independently. Accessibility supports social inclusion for people with disabilities as well as the aging population and those living in rural areas and people in developing countries. Accessibility with respect to documents also benefits people without disabilities by providing a more enjoyable end user experience. Documents are much more easier to navigate and they're more descriptive and they keep the viewer engaged. Okay. All right, and then we come to the last piece of the triangle here, which is the accessibility and video and audio content. Okay, and the topics that we're going to discuss here focus on three specific areas. And it's CART, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. And that is actually the closed captioning type services that are located in your multimedia viewer currently right now. That is for real-time closed captioning services by human. It's not automated captions, it's by human. And we're going to touch more about that in a second. Post-production captioning, that is embedded video on your website, YouTube videos, Vimeo videos, or whatever hosting platform that you have your videos hosted on. And of course, audio description. We're going to touch base on who uses these services, how are they provided, and when and where they can be used, and also why they should be offered from a legal and ethical and business perspective. So CART, like I mentioned earlier, it's the Communication Access Real-Time Translation. There are two ways to deliver it. It's either on-site, where you actually bring a captioner, a captioner on-site to listen to those meetings and provide real-time captioning or translation. Or like what we have here for our webinar today is remote, which is more of the preferred model, where the captioner just needs an audio bridge or a telephone or an audio connection, and they can simply just provide transcription or captioning type services for your meeting or your event. We would simply just provide you with what we call a stream text link, and then you will see it in real time, the captionings appearing on your screen. It's done by humans, like I mentioned earlier, and they are over 80% accurate. If we are provided ahead of time with a run of show, a script to a speech, or meeting notes, they really get that accuracy really high. So it's important to be prepared for webinars and meetings and so forth. Our captioners can type over 200 words per minute, which is crazy because I can't come anywhere near that. And I still look at my keyboard as I type. So it is truly remarkable they can get that high. We are starting to see more and more use cases with students in the classroom, particularly in higher ed and university level, business people in meetings. We see a lot of in-person conferences are utilizing CART services, event streaming online, both on website and even on Facebook and YouTube type live streaming and broadcasts. We're starting to see more and more of that as well. We saw, during the pandemic, a greater need for live captioning services while everyone was using Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, Teams, whatever platform you use for a video collaboration. There was more and more of a need for real-time translation and closed captioning type services. Now, also, there is a standard when it comes to video type content as well, and it's actually called the CVAA, which is the 21st Century Communication and Video Act. So again, being able to provide that closed captioning option for meetings, live events, et cetera, is part of those standards as well. Post-production captioning, like I mentioned, embedded video, videos on hosting platforms such as YouTube and Vimeo, learning management systems, LMSs, ensuring that university learning management systems such as Canvas, Blackboard, Litmos, etc., are having content uploaded directly into those platforms that are fully captioned. Again, they follow guidelines, whether it's the ADA, Title II, Title III, the FCC, Section 504, 508, CVAA. I mean, there's a lot of acronyms here, a lot of guidelines with regards to closed captioning. So it is kind of a necessity to offer that option as well. The World Health Organization did a study recently and determined that 20% of Americans are deaf or have a hearing loss, which is remarkable. Many more who do not have a hearing loss, you actually use captions. I know personally, you know, my 6-year-old was learning to read, and so what we do is that we leave the captioning on all time on the TV, so their eyes are more drawn to the actual reading the words on the television versus listening, and then we've seen a dramatic improvement. We've talked to many other, whether it's visual specialists and also educators, and they say it is a great tactic to, when children are learning to read, that to leave the closed captioning on because their eyes are more drawn to it. Another reason for social media is there's no default. I mean, videos default to no sound. So as you're scrolling through your Facebook feed or whatever feeds you have, you know, you may see videos that are, as you get close to them, are already starting to move, but they're turned off by default, which is a good thing because you don't want to have videos just start with their audio playing as you're scrolling. But if you didn't want to just read the closed captioning as you're scrolling, it's a much better experience. I will say, again, there's you know, not all captions are created equally. There are automated speech recognition services that are out there, but they are not accurate at all. That's why, again, we heavily rely on the human transcription, the human alignment, and human quality control of our post-production captioning. And then lastly, audio description. So audio description is where the video content that does not have dialogue is being described. The actions are being described verbally on the screen. There are two methodologies that are behind audio description: extended versus standard. The extended version is where you actually stop the video and describe what is happening visually on that screen, so people who are low vision can have an understanding of what's happening within that video. And then there's the standard version where you look for gaps in the dialogue to provide some sort of verbal visual, I guess, to what's happening on the screen. Extended is usually the preferred method because you can actually provide more dialogue to the video. But it's considered an alternative format to closed captioning services. Again, the World Health Organization stated that the 10% of Americans have a vision loss, and the FCC has now mandated that broadcasting stations provide up to 50 hours of audio described programming per year. And also what you're starting to see now is that streaming services are offering audio description options as well. Netflix and Disney Plus have now over 1,000 titles available with their video and show content in audio description type format. So which is a great thing, and we're anticipating obviously that number is just going to continue to grow as more and more new content is being developed. So with that being said, it's now time to take participant questions. I'd like to keep in mind that we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. However, due to the number of participants and the limited time, we may not have the capacity to answer all of them right now, but we'll make every effort to address all of those questions. So with that being said, I'm going to ask Kim Brussel to see if any questions have come through.
Hi, Mike. I have one question that says, this is a great presentation. There's so much valuable information here. They would like to know, where would an organization begin this journey?
I would say selfishly, you can call the Viscardi Center. So we can, this is what organizations like the Viscardi Center provide, these types of services. We will have the conversation with you and you and your team. We'll discuss what your wants, needs, and goals, and what drove you to include digital inclusion into your culture and your online presence. We will go over the discovery process. We will analyze your website and talk about user flows, most visited pages on your website, if there's any documents on your website, and go through that thorough discovery process to determine exactly what your needs are with regards to accessibility. And then what we'll do is that we'll come up with solutions to how to achieve those goals. And like I mentioned earlier, is it at the source code level? Is it at the overlay level, et cetera?
Mike, I have one level here too. One more question here. It's asking, how do you get your organization to become champions of these types of efforts?
I would say it starts at the C-suite level, at the executive level. There has to be a cultural shift for inclusion. It starts with the online digital presence, ensuring that it is welcoming to all people, including people with disabilities, to have an easy experience at that level. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, it starts with the employment level as well. You're hiring people with disabilities. They need to be able to navigate, apply for the job, be able to have those interview process. The onboarding materials need to be made accessible. But then also, once they have the job, how do you make them comfortable? Are PowerPoints, meeting notes, Word documents, are they being authored in accessible formats or accessible ways of creation? So that to take everybody into account when they have to access and make edits to those documents, and they can fulfill their job duties. Ensuring that captioning is available for all internal meetings as well as external meetings. Ensuring that all marketing materials, I know here at the Viscardi Center, before we have any email marketing campaigns, we ensure accessibility on all those messages is done or performed prior to emailing them out to the masses. But again, it starts with that. It starts at the C-suite level and then trickles down to the other divisions throughout the organization. But it is a cultural change. It is change, and that has to start at the top.
Okay, Mike, and then just one last one here. Do you have any suggestions on how to keep on top of trends and topics that are happening within the digital accessibility space?
Sure. Again, selfish plug here. The Viscardi Center puts out a monthly newsletter with what's happening in the digital accessibility world. We include about 4 or 5 different topics, and not just what Viscardi Center is doing, but what other organizations are. There are a number of digital accessibility organizations that are putting out webinars or putting out blog writing and articles, resources such as tips for making your virtual meetings accessible, and tips for authoring of documents to do that. There are a number of organizations that are out there, but obviously the Viscardi Center, American Federation for the Blind is another good resource. NFB, the National Federation for the Blind, is another great resource. There's a number of resources out there, but there is a lot of content there.
That's it for questions, Mike, on my end.
Great. Okay. So, one last time before we end our session today, I ask you to respond to one final question. Now, If you all have a feeling of deja vu, there's a reason. It's the same question I had asked you in the beginning. We are very curious to observe any differences in the group's response. So again, please answer it honestly. Doing so will help us evaluate the effectiveness of today's session. Again, please know that your responses are anonymous, and answering the question honestly is essential to helping us understand the needs and our effectiveness. So please take a moment to answer it. The question should be appearing on the right-hand side. So with that being said, the question is, again, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 equals very little understanding and 5 equals extensive understanding. How would you rate your understanding of digital accessibility services and why is important? Please take a second and we'll wait for to answer the question, and we'll wait for WebEx to tally the answers. Okay. All right, so it looks like we've got more 4s and 5s. So I think that's I think we've done our job here today. So thank you everyone for completing that question again. Also, as I briefly mentioned earlier, immediately following today's event, you'll be asked to complete a survey about your experience. We strongly encourage you to do so in order to help us provide valuable trainings moving forward. I know we've barely scratched the surface here on this important topic, but I wanted to say thank you to all in the audience for joining us here today. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And just to remind you again, the Viscardi Center greatly values your input, and we hope you will complete the survey of this event that will pop up on your screens immediately following the session. Once again, my name is Mike Caprera, and thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.